What happens when your ambition grows, but the people around you don't? Why does success feel more dangerous the higher you rise? Today, we solve the problem no one warns you about: the hidden danger of outgrowing everyone around you. When an individual grows beyond the pace, vision, or capabilities of those around them, a subtle yet profound shift occurs. One that is almost invisible at first, but powerful enough to reshape their entire social environment. This shift is the isolation of power. It does not begin with conflict or confrontation. Rather, it begins with separation. Not physical separation, but a widening gap in understanding, ambition, and awareness. As you rise, you start to perceive the world differently. Your priorities change, your thinking sharpens, and your goals expand. Yet the people around you, who once felt aligned with your path, remain rooted in the mindset you have already grown out of. This is where isolation quietly takes root. Power in its truest form is not about authority or dominance. It is about the strength of perception. It is the ability to see further than others can, the ability to act when others hesitate, the ability to endure challenges that others fear. When you begin to develop this level of perception and strategic awareness, those around you may not be able to follow your reasoning. Ideas that seem clear to you appear extreme to them. Risks you evaluate with precision look reckless in their eyes. Ambitions that ignite you appear unrealistic to those who have accepted limitations as a natural part of life. Thus, the isolation of power begins as a difference in mindset long before it ever becomes a difference in position or achievement. As your capabilities grow, you start making decisions from a vantage point others cannot understand. You begin operating with long-term vision while they cling to short-term comfort. You start valuing discipline while they continue to rely on motivation. Every step you take upward reinforces the distance between your evolving mind and their familiar habits. This distance creates a sense of foreignness. Without meaning to, you become the outsider in your own circle. Someone who sees too much, wants too much, knows too much. You do not reject them, but they begin rejecting the version of you that no longer fits their expectations. Once people sense that you are operating at a level they cannot reach, they instinctively pull away or attempt to pull you back. This reaction is not always fueled by malice. Sometimes it is simply the discomfort of being confronted with your evolution. Sometimes it is fear. Fear that your growth will redefine the dynamics of the relationship. Fear that your ambition will expose their stagnation. And sometimes it is confusion, because they no longer understand the world you are striving to build. Isolation becomes even more pronounced when you try to express your ideas. Conversations that once flowed easily now feel strained. You limit what you share, not out of secrecy, but because you can sense that your thoughts will not be received as you intend. You begin filtering your ambitions, not to appear humble, but to avoid the tension that honesty creates. This silence forms the walls of your isolation. You are surrounded by people, yet alone in your thinking. You have allies in proximity, yet opponents in perspective. The isolation of power deepens when you realize that guidance, counsel, and meaningful conversation become scarce. Those who could once give you advice can no longer understand the problems you face. Their solutions are rooted in the world you have already left behind. Their warnings are born from fears you overcame long ago. Their opinions, though well-intentioned, become irrelevant to the level you now operate on. And so you make decisions alone, first by necessity, then by habit. This solitude may feel empowering at times, because it confirms your advancement. But the very same solitude is dangerous, because it removes the balance and perspective that once kept you grounded. You begin carrying the weight of every decision. You become the strategist, the planner, the executor, all in one. The people around you start relying on your strength while offering little in return. Their dependence becomes your burden. Their uncertainty becomes your limitation. Their lack of vision becomes the ceiling you are constantly forced to break through. Over time, the isolation of power transforms into a new reality. You occupy a space above others, but not alongside them. You see further, but you walk alone. You plan ahead, but you cannot share your plans freely. You feel responsible for the direction of those who cannot keep up. And in this imbalance, isolation becomes the price of growth. It is not a punishment, nor is it a noble sacrifice. It is simply the natural consequence of outpacing the environment that once shaped you. When a person accelerates in growth, ambition, or capability, something fundamental changes in the eyes of those around them. At first, the change is subtle, almost harmless. People notice your improvement, your discipline, your clarity. They might compliment you, admire you, or express curiosity. But beneath those polite reactions lies something older and far more instinctive, the quiet shift in how they perceive you. Growth alters not only your path, it alters how others interpret your presence. This shift is known as threat perception, and it is one of the most overlooked dangers of rising faster than your environment. Human nature is ancient. Long before civilization, tribes depended on balance to maintain stability. When one member grew noticeably stronger, smarter, or more capable than the rest, the group had to determine whether this rising individual was an asset or a threat. That ancient instinct persists today, even though the world has changed. People rarely admit it, and many do not consciously recognize it. But the moment your abilities surpass theirs, they begin evaluating you not as you are, but as someone who could disrupt the existing hierarchy. Threat perception does not always manifest through open hostility. It begins quietly, in the shadows of emotion, in the subtle discomfort that arises when someone realizes you are no longer their equal. They begin comparing themselves to you without meaning to. Your victories highlight their failures. Your progress draws attention to their stagnation. Your confidence exposes their doubt. These comparisons ignite a silent calculation within them. What does your success mean for their identity, their importance, their relevance? And once that calculation begins, you are no longer just a person. You become a potential danger to the fragile equilibrium they rely on. This sense of threat is not always rooted in envy. Sometimes it is rooted in fear. Fear that your growth will change the relationship dynamic. Fear that you will leave them behind. Fear that you will outshine them. People often attach their sense of stability to the roles they play in the lives of others. When you rise too quickly, you break the roles they are comfortable occupying. A friend who once felt superior now feels insecure. A colleague who once felt competent now feels inadequate. A family member who once gave you advice now feels unnecessary. As you ascend, their sense of self wavers, and rather than examining their own weaknesses, many choose the easier path, viewing you as the source of the discomfort. Threat perception intensifies when your growth becomes consistent. A single achievement may be dismissed, excused, or rationalized, but sustained progress forces others to confront a truth they may not want to face. They realize your rise is not an accident. It is not luck. It is not temporary. It is a pattern driven by discipline, ambition, and strategy. This realization threatens their worldview. It reminds them of what they could be doing but are not. And nothing is more uncomfortable than seeing someone else living the life you could have built for yourself. Once this discomfort sets in, their behavior toward you begins to shift. They may start questioning your motives, even when your intentions are pure. They may downplay your achievements to protect their pride. They may interpret your confidence as arrogance, your boundaries as coldness, your independence as disloyalty. These distortions form a protective barrier for them, allowing them to maintain their self-image without confronting the real issue. Your growth challenges their identity. Threat perception also breeds subtle forms of resistance. People may not attack you directly. Instead, they undermine you quietly. A dismissive comment here, a withheld compliment there. Small acts of distancing, small acts of minimizing, small acts of discouragement wrapped in polite tones. These behaviors accumulate, creating a climate of tension that you can feel even when no one speaks of it openly. You begin to sense the fragility of their reactions, the unspoken discomfort in the room, the hesitation in their eyes when they see you pursuing something greater. As you continue to grow, even your presence becomes a reminder of the gap between you and them. In conversations, you notice the change. They become guarded, selective with their words, careful not to expose their insecurities. They avoid sharing their failures with you, because your improvement makes their shortcomings more visible. They avoid asking for your help, because accepting it would confirm the imbalance they are trying to deny. And so relationships that once felt natural begin to carry a weight that is difficult to ignore. Threat perception also affects how people interpret your success. When you were at their level, your accomplishments were celebrated. But once you surpass them, those same accomplishments are questioned. They suspect you have hidden advantages. They believe you must be doing something manipulative behind the scenes. They assume you have become someone different. And in their need to justify their discomfort, they rewrite the narrative of who you are and how you achieved what you did. Their perception of threat shapes their perception of you. The greatest irony is that people rarely perceive your growth as something inspiring. Instead of seeing it as proof of what is possible, they see it as evidence of what they failed to do. Rather than learning from you, they distance themselves from you. Instead of rising with you, they protect their ego by lowering their view of you. And this shift happens not because you have changed in ways that harm them, but because your evolution forces them to examine a version of themselves they would rather avoid. As you rise above your environment, you become more than a person. You become a disruption to the psychological order others depend on, and in this disruption lies the true danger of outgrowing the people around you. As a person begins to rise beyond the limits of their surroundings, one of the most significant yet easily overlooked consequences is the gradual loss of advisors and balance. Growth demands clarity, discipline, and a willingness to confront difficult truths. But as your capabilities expand, the number of people who can genuinely challenge your thinking begins to shrink. The higher you climb, the fewer voices exist that can offer insight equal to your level of awareness. At first, this feels like a reward, proof that you are advancing. Yet with time, you begin to understand that the absence of equals carries a heavy cost. In any stage of life, the strength of an individual often depends on the strength of their counsel. People become sharper when surrounded by those who question them intelligently, correct their missteps, or offer perspectives they could not consider alone. But when you outgrow your circle, the dynamic shifts dramatically. Those who once helped you think begin to look to you for answers. Those who once challenged your ideas now simply accept them. Those who once guided you now defer to you, whether out of admiration, comfort, or insecurity. This creates a silent but dangerous imbalance. As your growth accelerates, conversations that once carried depth become shallow. The people who used to contribute meaningfully now nod along, offering agreement instead of insight. Their approval becomes easy to obtain, not because your ideas are flawless, but because they no longer possess the experience or growth to evaluate them critically. Without realizing it, you move from being part of an exchange to carrying the entire weight of every interaction. You speak more and listen less, not out of ego, but because there are fewer voices worth listening to. Over time, this creates a vacuum where true intellectual or strategic resistance once existed, and in the absence of resistance, even the strongest mind becomes vulnerable. A blade cannot remain sharp if it no longer meets anything that pushes back against it. In the same way, a mind cannot remain balanced if it is never challenged, corrected, or questioned. When you outgrow everyone around you, you inherit the burden of your own unchecked thinking. You carry the responsibility of your decisions without the benefit of refined counsel. You begin solving problems alone because no one else understands their complexity. You begin planning alone because others cannot see as far ahead as you can, and you begin doubting whether anyone can truly support your path. This shift creates a subtle psychological erosion. At first, solitude feels like liberation. You enjoy the clarity of making decisions without interference. You appreciate the speed at which you can move without having to explain yourself. But eventually, you notice the imbalance. You have no one to warn you when you are about to make a mistake. No one to question the assumptions you may be blind to. No one to offer a perspective you have not yet considered. The danger is not that others turn against you, but that they become incapable of helping you carry the weight of your decisions. When you lose advisors, you lose mirrors. Those rare people who reflect your thoughts back to you with equal strength. Without these mirrors, self-perception becomes distorted. You may begin to overestimate your abilities or underestimate the risks you face. You may think your ideas are unchallenged because they are brilliant when, in reality, they are unchallenged because no one around you can match them. You lose the grounding influence of someone who can tell you when you are wrong, not out of jealousy or fear, but out of understanding. And as this balance disappears, a subtle form of arrogance can sneak in, not the loud arrogance of superiority, but the quiet arrogance of isolation, where you begin to rely solely on your own perspective, because it is the only perspective available. Another danger emerges when those around you shift from advisors to dependents. Instead of offering guidance, they seek direction. Instead of sharing solutions, they ask for them. You become the source of answers for everyone else while finding none for yourself. Their reliance becomes a weight you never intended to carry. You become responsible not only for your own path, but for theirs as well. And the pressure to maintain your position increases, because the people around you depend on your strength in ways they can no longer match. In this imbalance, loneliness grows. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of having no intellectual equals. You begin to crave conversations that challenge you. You start searching for minds strong enough to push back. But your old circle cannot provide that anymore, and you find yourself caught between who you used to be and who you are becoming. The loss of advisors also affects your emotional balance. People who grow quickly often develop emotional resilience, ambition, and mental clarity at a pace others cannot understand. But without someone who can hold you steady during moments of doubt, or remind you of your humanity in moments of intensity, you begin to feel the effects of imbalance. You may become overly strategic, overly logical, or overly detached. Growth without balance creates a version of strength that is powerful but fragile, because it lacks the grounding that comes from being surrounded by capable minds. As you continue ascending, the silence around you grows heavier. You begin to realize that the higher your position becomes, the fewer people can truly walk alongside you. And in that realization lies the core of this danger. Outgrowing your environment doesn't just separate you from others. It separates you from the guidance and balance that once helped you rise. As a person rises above their environment, one of the most subtle yet damaging consequences is the transformation of their relationships from mutual exchanges into one-sided dependencies. What begins as respect for your growth slowly evolves into reliance, and that reliance over time becomes a quiet drain on your strength. This is the paradox of outgrowing your circle. While you become more capable, the people around you become less capable in relation to you, and their dependence creates vulnerabilities that can ultimately weaken even the strongest individual. In the early stages of growth, people admire your discipline, your clarity, your progress. They see you as someone who can solve problems, navigate challenges, and think strategically. They value your insight because it helps them move forward. But as you continue rising, something shifts in the dynamic. What was once occasional support becomes constant expectation. What was once shared effort becomes silent delegation. The people around you begin depending on your strength instead of developing their own. They look to you for guidance before attempting to think for themselves. They trust your decisions more than their own judgment. And slowly, the burden of their lives becomes a weight you carry without ever agreeing to do so. This dependence creates an invisible imbalance. You begin solving problems that are not yours. You begin mentally and emotionally supporting people who give nothing back. You start playing multiple roles: leader, advisor, caretaker, motivator, none of which you originally intended to take on. At first, it feels manageable because you are capable. But capability is both a blessing and a trap. Because you can handle everything, people assume you will handle everything. What they once appreciated becomes what they expect, and what they expect becomes what they demand silently. The moment you become the strongest person in your environment, you begin carrying the weight of everyone who refuses to grow. This dependence weakens you in ways that are not immediately visible. It drains your energy because you invest in problems that dilute your focus. It slows your progress because you must manage the consequences of choices others refuse to make. It limits your forward movement because you are tethered to the pace of those who cannot keep up. Even the most capable mind has limits, and when those limits are spent supporting those who rely on you rather than rising with you, you begin to feel a heaviness in your own path. Dependence also corrupts the quality of your relationships. People who depend on you for direction stop seeing you as a person with your own burdens. They see you as a resource, a solution, a living stability they can cling to. Their admiration shifts into entitlement. They become frustrated when you do not help them in the way they expect. They interpret your boundaries as neglect and your silence as arrogance. They subconsciously rewrite the relationship so that you are responsible for maintaining their comfort. Once this dynamic takes hold, their emotional state becomes another obligation you must manage. The danger deepens when dependence transforms into subtle manipulation. People who rely heavily on your strength often fear losing it. Instead of improving themselves, they attempt to secure their access to your abilities. They guilt you when you distance yourself. They praise you when you give more than you should. They cling to your presence because without you, their weaknesses become exposed. In this dynamic, your growth becomes their shelter, but their stagnation becomes your burden. Dependence also affects your ability to evolve. The more you carry others, the less time you have to refine your own thinking. You spend emotional and mental energy solving the wrong problems. You become the support system for people who do not support you. And in doing so, you weaken your ability to move independently. True progress requires focus and clarity, yet dependence fragments both. You begin living in a constant state of divided attention, partly dedicated to your path, partly consumed by the needs of others. Another danger emerges when dependence masks itself as loyalty. People may claim to stand by you, but what they truly stand by is the value they receive from you. Their loyalty lasts only as long as your usefulness. The moment you withdraw your effort, the dynamic shifts. Their admiration fades, replaced by frustration. Their loyalty dissolves, revealing that it was never loyalty at all. It was reliance. This revelation often arrives too late, after you have invested time, energy, and emotion into people who could never carry any weight for you in return. Dependence also blocks your ability to build powerful alliances. When you are surrounded by those who depend on you, your environment becomes filled with people who drain rather than elevate you. Instead of seeking partnerships with equals, you become overwhelmed by relationships that require constant maintenance. And because you spend so much time compensating for the weakness of others, you lose the capacity to seek out those who could sharpen or challenge you. This creates an environment in which you are strong alone, but surrounded by weakness, a structural instability that can collapse under pressure. Dependence creates weakness not only for those who rely on you, but for you as well. Because when you carry the weight of those who refuse to grow, you sacrifice the momentum needed to pursue your own evolution. You become the center of your environment, but a center surrounded by fragility. And fragility spreads. When one person depends on you, the system becomes slightly unbalanced. When several do, you become the foundation of a structure that was never built to stand. And no matter how strong you are, a foundation cannot support endless weight without eventually cracking under the pressure it never asked to bear. This is the hidden danger of becoming the strongest person in your circle. The more others depend on you, the more you risk weakening yourself in the process. As a person's growth accelerates beyond the limits of their original environment, the importance of strategic relationships becomes impossible to ignore. In the beginning, growth feels like a personal journey, a solitary battle fought with discipline and ambition. But as you elevate, you begin to realize that rising alone is not only exhausting, it is unsustainable. The people around you either amplify your momentum or drain it. They either sharpen your mind or dull it. They either lift your vision or pull it back to the familiar ground they refuse to leave. This is why strategic relationships matter not as ornaments of success, but as the scaffolding that holds your progress steady. When you start outgrowing your circle, you experience the slow dismantling of the support system that once helped you rise. People who were once aligned with your goals drift into a different pace. Their conversations no longer challenge you. Their habits no longer resemble your discipline. Their perspective remains rooted in a version of life you are no longer willing to accept. You begin to see that ambition cannot thrive in an environment of passivity. Vision cannot flourish among those who fear change, and potential cannot unfold in a circle that celebrates comfort more than growth. This is where the necessity of strategic relationships becomes clear. You need people who can match your direction, your pace, and your hunger for something greater. Strategic relationships are not built on convenience or familiarity. They are built on alignment. People who share your drive understand the weight of your goals without requiring explanation. They recognize the sacrifices that growth demands because they live by the same code. They do not resent your ambition. They respect it. They do not fear your evolution. They expect it. Their presence supports your rise rather than complicating it. And in their company, you feel a rare form of relief, the ability to grow without apology. The significance of strategic relationships reveals itself most clearly in your choices and decisions. When you are surrounded by people who think small, your big ideas sound unreasonable. When you are surrounded by people who prioritize comfort, your discipline appears extreme. When your environment lacks ambition, your ambition becomes a source of tension. But in the presence of strong minds, your goals feel natural. Your discipline feels normal. Your intensity feels understood. It becomes easier to make bold decisions because you are supported by people who can see beyond immediate limitations. They offer perspectives that refine your thinking rather than diminish it. Their feedback helps you identify blind spots instead of feeding your doubts. Their presence elevates your standard because excellence becomes the baseline, not the exception. Strategic relationships also protect you from the psychological dangers of rising alone. When you outgrow your environment, isolation is almost inevitable. You carry the weight of decisions without guidance. You face challenges without allies. You navigate uncertainty without reassurance. Over time, isolation hardens you, but it also exhausts you. Even the strongest individuals need balance, reflection, and caution from people who operate on a similar level. Without that, confidence can turn into overconfidence, sharpness can turn into rigidity, and independence can turn into isolation. Strategic relationships act as stabilizers. People who can challenge your ideas without undermining them, who can question your direction without weakening it, and who can keep you grounded without holding you down. Another reason strategic relationships matter is that they redefine what becomes possible. When you surround yourself with people who aim for greatness, your own standards begin to rise. You move from thinking about what is realistic to thinking about what is achievable. You stop limiting your goals to the expectations of your old circle and begin expanding them to match the potential of your new environment. Strategic relationships create a collective force, a shared momentum that multiplies effort rather than merely adding to it. With the right people, risk becomes less frightening, ambition becomes more practical, and breakthroughs become more frequent. Strategic relationships also filter your emotional landscape. When you are surrounded by those who fear your growth, you absorb their doubt. Their insecurities become your hesitation. Their limitations become barriers to your own progress. But the right people energize you. They do not drain your emotional strength, they replenish it. Their support is not rooted in dependence, but in shared ambition. They encourage accountability, not complacency. They help you maintain focus instead of distracting you with trivial problems. Their presence reduces unnecessary emotional noise, making space for clarity and purpose. As you continue rising, you begin to see that not everyone in your life is meant to travel the entire journey with you. Some people belong to the earlier chapters of your story. Others arrive later, at stages where your growth demands stronger alliances. Strategic relationships matter because they form the foundation of your evolution. They do not hold you back. They allow you to grow beyond the limitations of your origins. They do not shrink in the face of your ambition, they expand with it. And as you advance, you understand that the people you surround yourself with are not merely influences. They are determinants of your future,